Exploration and combat are two cornerstones of the search action genre, and I'm counting down the top 25 best indie games not to be missed, having both popular hits and hidden gems, beginning with Gestalt, Steam and Cinder, a pixel art title set in a steampunk world where our heroine is fighting against enemies and uncovering the schemes of the corrupt overseers of the city. Combat is a highlight here, since you are facing off against adversaries both mechanical and mutant, using both ranged and melee weapon options like your gun and sword, which gives you options for each combat scenario. Interestingly, there is an RPG-like progression system that is more common in the Castlevania games, since you straight up have stat points to allocate, and of course, as a pixel art guy, the visual style is absolutely gorgeous to me, having some of the most intricately detailed backgrounds and environments as well as combat animations, and is an absolute delight. I'm going to give a special exception to Crypt Custodian here, since I largely associate Metroidvanias with side-scrollers, and yes, that means even first-person titles don't really count to me, but this game is something special that I want to encourage you to try if you have not. While it has that Zelda-style 3/4 view camera angle, you can straight up jump in this game, and there is platforming, so it kind of counts, with the Metroidvania ability unlocked, allowing you to access new areas like other games in this genre. You play as Pluto, a cat which has died but is now tasked with cleaning up the afterlife, having great exploration and combat, which is critical for this kind of game. In addition to that, there are puzzles to solve, secrets to uncover, and interesting spooky creature designs, also being able to talk to and befriend banished spirits, all wrapped up with a charming art style as well, where this developer has been going at it a while, and his other games like Isolates and Sheeple are also worth a play. A game which flew under the radar for many is Phoenotopia Awakening, a more classically designed 2D action-adventure platformer leaning into the old school, since it reminds me of games like Zelda 2 and Simon's Quest, rather than the typical Metroidvania formula. The plot kicks off when a massive starship appears in the sky, abducting all the adults, leaving only the young behind, and as the new, oldest member of the community, our heroine embarks on a journey to unravel the mystery. What makes this game so compelling is of course the art style, having strikingly beautiful pixel art, which you can especially see in the environments. You'll be exploring dungeons, fighting enemies and solving puzzles, but it is not all combat, also having life sim-like elements like fishing and cooking. There's even an Ocarina of Time style flute, with different songs which you can use to interact with the world, definitely nailing it in the exploration portion. Combat is of note as well due to the variety of enemies and tools at your disposal, from a crossbow to a sword and even using bombs and other tools, giving you options to deal with whatever comes your way, and is pretty underrated all things considered, so try it if you have not. A new release from 2024 is Frontier Hunter Erza's Wheel of Fortune, which released out of early access and is an anime-inspired Metroidvania with a cool visual style, mixing almost cel-shaded character models with 3D environmental objects as well as a world which mixes both sci-fi and fantasy. You play as Erza, a skilled hunter and a rising star in the Imperial Force, gaining the favour of the Emperor through her many military victories, now having to lead a new exploration team on an epic adventure to explore and solve mysteries of the world. In Metroidvania fashion, combat requires players to adapt and utilize different weapons and abilities to defeat powerful enemies, where you can customize your abilities and enhance your skills to fit your playstyle. But the twist here is that you can swap between characters in an almost tag fighting game kind of style, seamlessly weaving them into combos and attacks, but having to decide who to use depending on the situation. This does bear a stylistic similarity to a game later down in this list, which is one of my favourites, but it's doing enough interesting things on its own, such as adding in a minigun into the fray against werewolves, giant wasps, drones and more, being super sleek and is going under the radar. An interesting release out of PlayStation's China Hero project is F.I.S.T, Forged in Shadow Torch, which is set in a dystopian world ruled by a dictatorial regime where anthropomorphic animals struggle under the boot of an oppressive mechanical army. Our protagonist is a former soldier who fought in the Resistance War, now having to take up arms once again when his friend is captured. See what I did there? Yes, that is because the whole design around this character is that he wields a massive mechanical fist which he wears on his back, which can transform into 3 different modes: the default fist, a drill, and a whip, being used both in combat and exploration as you switch between the 3. Combat is a focus here, feeling pretty good and fluid with the 1v1 boss fights especially being of note. The diesel punk world is beautifully designed, having that very grungy look with some influences from Asian cities in terms of environmental design, and interestingly, it's on Unreal Engine 4 instead of 5 due to the time period in which this was made, but it still looks awesome, with this game being one of the major successes coming out of that program. One of my personal favourite titles is Guacamelee Super Turbo Championship Edition, a title which I stumbled upon quite early in my indie gaming career and loved it ever since. This is a Mexican culture inspired title in which you play as a luchador or Mexican wrestler who must save El Presidente's daughter from the evil skeleton Carlos Calaca. The combos and moves here are Lucha Libre inspired, so you'll be pulling off moves like suplexes and headbutts, also giving you the ability to switch between the land of the living and the dead, being used in combat, exploration, and even devious platforming challenges. And while there is a sequel named Guacamelee 2, I do still prefer the first entry. A select few developers get to have multiple games on this list, with that applying to Team Ladybug out of Japan, who have a knack for this kind of game, in which record of Lodoss War, Deedlit, and Wonder Labyrinth brings the classic Japanese anime series from the 1980s to life in the form of a 2D Metroidvania. For those unfamiliar, the series has been referred to as Japanese Dungeons and Dragons, of having the high fantasy setting of elves and dragons and diving into dungeons and taking on quests, and was hugely influential. One thing that you will notice about this game is that it channels Symphony of the Night very strongly, down to the RPG progression and especially the backdash movement, so much so that people have called it a clone, but I just think that the developers are big fans, and hey, that game released in 1997, so the time gap is large enough. You can grind to level up and become ridiculously overpowered, adding in an elemental spirit system to empower your attacks, when the spirits themselves can be leveled up, and you can even get equipment and sell off weapons that you no longer use. So the RPG elements are pretty established here as compared to other games in the space. In addition to combat, there are light puzzle elements that involve the use of your bow and arrows, giving it a nice balance, and again, me being me, the pixel art is absolutely gorgeous and is a treat for the eyes. I love indie games since indie developers always come up with the cleverest of ideas and are willing to give it a shot, taking on the risk that comes with it, which is why I'm always happy to see games like Yoku's Island Express succeed, the self-styled Pinballvania, which is one of my favourites. You play as the newly appointed Dung Beetle Postman of the vibrant Mokumana Island, after the previous postman decided to split, delivering packages, solving puzzles, and assisting the island's quirky inhabitants. You are unable to jump in this game, instead being tethered to a boulder, which of course is the ball in pinball, getting bounced around pinball tables in order to move across the island. These tables are seamlessly integrated into the environment and look gorgeous, and the pinball feels good as well, cleverly giving you access to Metroidvania-style abilities which allow you to access new areas. The light-hearted atmosphere and especially the soundtrack is a delight, so for a chill, alternative take on the genre, this is a must-play. A highlight from 2023 is Afterimage, a gorgeous hand-drawn title set among the ruins of a vast fantasy realm where you explore ancient ruins, eerie landscapes, and fight towering creatures. As you explore this sprawling, interconnected world, you will engage with its combat systems, which forms the heart of the game, giving you access to a variety of abilities to tackle different enemies, with interesting enemy and especially boss designs as well. Equally, the platforming elements are just as fluid, so it feels good to move through this world and has a substantial amount of content, with How Long to Beat having it listed at 24.7 hours for the main story, and while it doesn't do anything particularly revolutionary, and the plot can be a little confusing, revolving around deities, massive beasts, and the destruction of our heroine's village, it is otherwise a pretty well made one of these, so if you're a fan, do give it a go. First things first, of course the 8-bit visuals of Astalon Tears of the Earth speaks to me, looking absolutely gorgeous in my opinion, and has an interesting structure. Set in a dying world, a mysterious tower has emerged in the post-apocalyptic desert, and our heroes, on a desperate mission to save their village, believe that the answer lies within. However, one of them has made a pact with the Titan of Death to allow them to reincarnate until they have completed their mission, setting up the game quite nicely. This features 3 playable characters in the Warrior, Archer and Mage, who have unique abilities which allow them to access new areas, but you do need to return to a bonfire to swap between the characters, which makes exploration of note. Progression in this game is interesting, since you can level up and get new abilities when you die, but is certainly not a roguelite, and does come to us from the developer of Castle in the Darkness, which is worth checking out as well. You cannot talk about indie Metroidvanias without mentioning Axiom Verge, since picture this, the year is 2015, a full 13 years without a new 2D Metroid game, but then came along this title, which on the surface looks like a throwback to Super Metroid, but is so much more. This has a stereotypical sci-fi facility setting as you battle biomechanical enemies in an alien world, using a variety of sci-fi guns and weapons to do so as you explore. But where this gets interesting is that you are allowed to use and manipulate glitches in the environment, such as moving through an impassable wall, allowing you to uncover hidden paths and defeat enemies in creative ways by corrupting them. Weapons have multiple functions due to this, giving you options in combat as well as exploration, with the atmosphere created by the haunting soundtrack being excellent as well, not to forget the stunning pixel art. It does have a little bit of a slow start though, and you might get stuck in that very Metroid kind of way in having to figure out where to go next, but that is part of the charm, so it is highly recommended. One of the sickest looking titles is GRIME, a 2D Souls-like Metroidvania from 2021, in which you play as a living black hole with the ability to absorb enemies through a parry which you need to master. There's a strange, otherworldly kind of look and feel to this game, so let's see if you'll be able to figure out what it is as I talk about the combat first. The Souls-like combat is of course a highlight, where you need to learn enemy attack patterns to be able to dodge out of the way and to successfully counter-attack, with the weapons being very unique and have different forms, Bloodborne style, since they are made from living creatures such as a centipede whip. Have you figured out the vibe yet? That is because GRIME has a world and enemies made of rock and root, rather than, I suppose, flesh and blood, so the enemies here are kind of humanoid looking, but made of a completely different material, which gives it a super gross but cool vibe. And post-launch, they have released free updates such as Parting Shade, Tinge of Terror, and Colors of Rot, all for free, which is very player-friendly, so despite a rough launch due to technical issues, this has gotten where it needs to be, and the developers are working on a sequel, GRIME 2, so look out for that as well. I like the SteamWorld games from heist to quest to build, but of course the crown jewel is SteamWorld Dig 2, a mining-focused Metroidvania where you need to dig into the earth to gather minerals, return to the surface to sell, and purchase upgrades so that you can carry more, dig faster and deeper to eventually get to new areas. In this sequel, our protagonist is looking for Rusty, the main character of SteamWorld Dig 1, who has gone missing, having to make her way through a variety of biomes in order to do so. The art in this game is a highlight and still holds up for a game from 2017, but the mining gameplay loop is king and is just so compelling and will keep you entertained for hours to come, where I believe a SteamWorld Dig 3 is in development, so play this to be up to date if you have not. When I first came across The Last Faith, my mind immediately went to pixel art Bloodborne, since it has a similar setup of our hero entering a cursed city where some sort of illness has horribly mutated the locals, taking on horrific monstrous forms and forcing the rest of the people to lock themselves in their homes. It does have the amnesiac protagonist setup, so you must figure out who the character is and what brought him to this place, combining intense combat with exploration, and as some of the most gorgeous pixel art that I have come across. Like your Souls-like titles, there are a variety of weapons and abilities in this game which are affected by your stats and even has a bonfire and Souls equivalent style of progression. And while not anything too new or crazy, it is a very well made one of these. Do be warned about the difficulty and challenge, since you will die to bosses, but that's part of the fun as you learn their attacks and master the game, with Metroidvania style ability unlocks like a double jump so that you can get to new places. It is very grimdark and gothic and is excellently done in terms of atmosphere, also having brutal execution animations, blasphemous style, and is a fantastic one of these. A game which might look questionable at first glance is Rabi-Ribi, since the main character is an anime bunny girl, but don't judge a book by its cover, since this is one of the best games in the genre and is more challenging than it seems. This is due to the bullet hell style combat, which might be taking inspiration from Toho games and requires precise dodging and quick reflexes in order to survive. The main plot revolves around our heroine, Irina, a rabbit transformed into a human girl, but wants to reclaim her original form, encountering a cast of interesting characters in the process. The most impressive thing about this game is the non-linearity, where Metroidvanias are supposed to be a little bit more open-ended in allowing you to choose where to go rather than being funneled into exploring a fixed path, since all the other paths are blocked off until you get an upgrade, and is present in this game since you can explore in any direction and even allows for sequence breaks. This means that you can skip over certain sections or bosses if you plan it right and know how to do it, and is relatively unknown all things considered, so get this if you have not. Of all the games in the Momodora series, the fourth entry, Reverie Under the Moonlight, is the most popular, even if the fifth and supposed last game did release in 2024. But every title is standalone and no prior knowledge is required of the other games. They all generally follow a similar setup, where you play as a shrine maiden on a quest, where in this case you are seeking an audience with the queen to get help in order to destroy a great evil that is threatening the kingdom. There's a variety of medieval fantasy enemies, from goblins to imps, monster girls and gigantic bosses, which keeps things interesting, with the humanoid-sized and shaped enemies actually being the most terrifying. There's an almost Souls-like nature to the combat, even if it doesn't have a stamina meter, since attacks are weighty and you do get punished for spamming buttons, all with an excellently done, moody atmosphere as well. You might have slept on this title from 2023 named Laika Age Through Blood, which, like Yoku's Island Express mentioned earlier, took the idea of a Metroidvania and gave it a unique spin, being a Motovania title, where of course you are riding on your motorbike to explore, but is also used in combat. Set in a gritty, post-apocalyptic world, play as a Mother Coyote warrior as she goes on an endless path of vengeance to take back what her people lost. Of course, the sick motorcycle combat is the highlight, since you can do wheelies and sick flips in mid-air after launching yourself off a ramp, but also have to use that momentum to aim your shots and brutally murder your enemies. While it looks kind of cute with the anthropomorphic animals, this is much more violent than you might expect, with the gigantic bosses of course being of note. The soundtrack is hauntingly beautiful as well, and tells a tale of survival and loss, of never giving up in the face of adversity, and is wholly unique. A game which is more than meets the eye is The Messenger. one that, on the surface, looks like another throwback title inspired by games like Ninja Gaiden, but as you will see, you will gain the ability to switch between 8 and 16-bit art styles through the course of the game, which is where it gets interesting. You play as a young ninja, having to become the messenger, fighting your way across a cursed realm to deliver a scroll that is key to your clan's survival. What starts off as a relatively straightforward action platformer transforms into a rich time-traveling odyssey filled with twists, turns, and humor, with the writing in this game being very good, so look out for that. As you traverse across the land, you'll master the combat, employing swift swordplay and magical abilities to vanquish your enemies. The gameplay is a love letter to classic games, but with modern polish, where the boss fights in particular are a challenge and might take you more than one try to beat. But I didn't run into any particular boss that absolutely crushed me, so if you're okay at games, you should be fine. The soundtrack is amazing as well, and they did release a free DLC titled Picnic Panic with a beach and summer theme, so go play that if you have not, with the overall package being excellent. I told you that only a select few developers get to double dip in a list like this, with that being the case for Tevi as well, since it comes to us from a Taiwanese developer who also made Rabi-Ribi covered earlier. There was something like 7 years in between the two games, so you can see the much improved visual style here, also being a pixel art Metroidvania, but this time with a more vibrant colour palette and more high resolution pixel art that is gorgeous, while still retaining the bullet hell inspired combat. Our heroine, Tevi, is searching for some objects of power, getting embroiled in a larger conspiracy along the way, although she does have, strangely enough, the help of a demon and an angel, who take the form of rotating orbs, which you can call upon in combat. There's a surprisingly deep, customizable combat system here that allows you to customize your attacks, where both melee or ranged focus builds are possible, and also has sigils and badges to add to the possibilities. One thing that might be a stickler is the writing seems a little odd, which might be a translation issue pertaining to Tevi's father, Professor Zima in particular, but don't let the minor annoyances get in the way of a great game. The jury's still out on this one as compared to Rabi-Ribi, since it looks much nicer, but doesn't give you as much flexibility in exploration, making up for that in the combat system, but call me shallow since this looks so much prettier, so I'm giving it a higher spot. Another new entry from 2024 is Animal Well, a game that stood out for two main reasons, the first being that this is the first game signed by publisher Big Mode, run by Video Game Donkey, a YouTuber with 7.5 million subscribers as of recording, so I'm sure that it helped, and the second being that this is not a conventional Metroidvania as well, instead being more focused on exploration and using special equipment rather than combat. I'll admit, I was skeptical at first, but within a few minutes of playing this game, it immediately clicks, where you play as this slime-like creature that has to explore the animal well. No clear story setup is established, so you are just wandering around, but then find items like a bubble wand, frisbee, yo-yo, and more, which can be used in clever ways, not just for navigation, but also to solve complex puzzles, with each new tool revealing new ways to interact with the environment. And the developer seems to have accounted for all the ways that you think this might work. The pixel art here is neat, even if I did immediately turn off the CRT filter, and while not high-bit, blow your mind kind of pixel art, there's still a charm to this game. The world is filled with secrets as well, such as hidden passages and chambers with rewards, as well as a larger meta puzzle that required the community to work together to solve, where I'm not sure about the current status of that, but don't go looking unless you want spoilers or have finished the game. As such, the more cryptic kind of world design is an interesting case study in itself, but it nails the joy of exploration and discovery, which is the most important part of video games to me. This next title comes with an asterisk since it isn't exactly an indie game being made by a larger Japanese corporation, but if you consider indie to be a term for games outside of the mainstream, Ender Lily's Quietus of the Night will fit the bill. Set in a world ravaged by a relentless curse known as the Blight, which takes the form of a corrupting rain which mutates all that it touches. You play as a young priestess who awakens in a decimated kingdom, taking on the task to purify the cursed beings roaming this once thriving land. The most interesting part is the combat, where our heroine doesn't fight directly, instead summoning the spirits of fallen knights, each with distinct combat styles, to fight on her behalf. Conveniently, these are also the bosses that you face, so after you defeat them in a fight, you will recruit them to your side, and also just so happens to have movement abilities that allow you to access new areas. The hauntingly beautiful art style of a decaying kingdom is memorable, complemented with a piano-centered soundtrack that is the perfect fit. The game is quite popular, so much so that there is a sequel, Ender Magnolia Bloom in the Mist, currently in Steam Early Access and is doing well, and will release in 1.0 sometime in 2025. The Touhou project is a collection of various media, largely fan-driven, spreading across novels, manga, and games, drawing from a cast of the same characters but put in different situations, and are largely known for the bullet hell shoot-'em-up style titles, so imagine my surprise when I came across a Metroidvania entry instead. You play as Sakuya, a maid that throws knives, and has the ability to freeze time, awakening in a strange new world and having to figure out what is going on. The world is filled with yokai, or Japanese supernatural entities that you need to battle by throwing the aforementioned knives, but has an interesting risk-reward system known as the Grace mechanic. If an enemy attack just barely misses you, this rewards you with HP, MP, and time points, being an interesting translation of bullet hell mechanics into a platformer. You will come across other characters from the Touhou universe as boss fights, which can be rather intense, but is a spectacle to behold, and of course has some of the most amazing looking pixel art, even if structurally, this game is not as freeform as some of the other games mentioned in this list. Okay, I've made my choice, since while there is a sequel to Blasphemous from 2019 named Blasphemous 2, which is a direct continuation of the story, I still prefer the original journey through Custodia, in which you play as the Penitent One, the cone helmet wearing protagonist on a quest to stop the miracle, an otherworldly divine force that is responsible for many of the events of the game, including twisting characters into horrific monsters. This draws upon the Catholic faith and perhaps elements of the Spanish Inquisition, since the developers are from Spain, from the dark Gothic setting and environments like cathedrals to the elements within the game like prayers and rosary beads, and even the larger themes like penance. There are skill trees in this game as the form of progression, so you'll be unlocking attacks and abilities through there, having a currency system similar to games like Dark Souls, which you will need to do a corpse run to retrieve if you die, and if you fail on that second try, means that all the tears gathered will be lost, adding to the challenge. While it doesn't have a stamina meter, this is pretty Souls-like in terms of feel of the combat, slightly less punishing but still challenging, and of course we have to talk about the pixel art when it comes to this game. Some of the bosses and backgrounds are so intricately detailed, and somehow they manage to make the little squares portray disembowelments and beheadings to grotesque effects, and is an absolute must play. The man most synonymous with the Castlevania series is Koji Igarashi, a producer and director of the series in the past, who has become somewhat of a legend with players, so when Konami stopped making games, he decided to start his own studio and bring his brand of Igavania to the world once again. If you're not familiar, this closely follows the Symphony of the Night school of design down to the RPG levels, since you can get XP from enemies and can level up, which also allows you to grind if you want to become overpowered for where you are at in the game, which can be fun, but I didn't find it to be necessary since skill does play a role as well. You play as Miriam, a shard binder, which is an unnatural fusion of human and demonically charged crystals, having to explore a demon-infested castle summoned by the villain of the game. One of the more interesting aspects of the game are the shards, which are random drops from enemies, which can be equipped and grants special abilities, which themselves can be ranked up to increase their power. It was somewhat of a miracle that this game got made, since the abrupt departure of Igarashi from Konami meant an uncertain future, but fans came together during the Kickstarter, raising over $5.5 million or 11 times its target back in 2015, with the game releasing 4 years later after what seemed like trouble in development, where they have continued to support the game with free DLC and updates, and development has started on a sequel since 2021, so I'm guessing that we will see something from them soon. What hasn't been said about Hollow Knight at this point, since this is widely regarded to be the best indie Metroidvania, and I'm not disagreeing, since the balance between challenging combat, open-ended exploration, and gorgeous visuals is just perfect, having a huge world to explore and a ton of content. Set in the fallen kingdom of Hello Nest, you play as the knight, exploring and uncovering the secrets of the kingdom, having to fight enemies along the way. In addition to your basic attack and pogo jump, you do have spells as well, which take a variety of forms, which consumes a resource known as soul that you gain through your melee attacks, providing a nice rhythm to the combat since this includes healing as well. In addition, there are charms which you can equip, which drastically alters the playstyle, and it is possible to sequence break the game. Just look up speedrunning videos after you're done to get your mind blown. They have supported it with post-launch content and really is value for money, especially since they didn't continually increase the price, which is still $14.99 without discounts, with the only complaints here being the map system as well as a slow start, but push through the front bit and you'll be rewarded with one of the best games ever. And like many of you, I am still eagerly anticipating the release of the sequel Hollow Knight Silksong. Watch this video for more of the best indie games.